Control, this is Voodoo 1. We have eyes on the target area. It's a graveyard down there. Voodoo 1, report status of the HVT. Did the convoy make the crossing? The radio static hissed, cutting through the rhythmic thrum of the idling RHIB engine. Inside the boat, Lieutenant Commander Miller stared at the dark, churning water of the strait. He looked at the GPS tracker, then at the shivering figure huddled in the corner of the deck, wrapped in 3 thermal blankets. Her lips were blue, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't hold the canteen of warm water. Negative, Control. The convoy is dead in the water. All 6 engines disabled. I repeat, 14 confirmed hits on engine blocks. The channel is blocked. Miller clicked off the mic and looked down at her again. He saw the drag bag soaked in oil and brine. The raw friction burns on her neck from the tow line. He remembered laughing at the briefing. He remembered saying a 100-pound female Marine couldn't handle the riptide, let alone the recoil. "You shouldn't be alive, Sergeant," Miller whispered, the arrogance gone, replaced by a terrified respect. "Nobody swims the Black Gap, not with gear, not in this storm." She didn't look up. She just stared at her hands, trying to command her fingers to stop trembling. "I didn't swim it because I wanted the exercise, sir," she rasped, her voice like broken glass. "I swam it because you said I couldn't." 24 hours earlier, forward operating base, Sulu, Philippines. The rain in the Sulu archipelago didn't fall. It materialized from the air, a heavy, suffocating curtain that smelled of rotting vegetation and salt. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, of Forward Operating Base Islander, the air conditioning fought a losing battle against the humidity. Staff Sergeant Elena "Ghost" Vance stood in the back of the room, her spine pressed against the plywood wall. She was motionless, a habit from the hide sites. Her eyes, dark and heavy with fatigue, tracked the laser pointer dancing across the projected map of the Sibutu Passage. "Mitok predicts the typhoon tracks north, but the outer bands are going to hammer the channel," Lieutenant Commander Miller said. He was a slab of a man, bearded, with the kind of relaxed posture that only men who killed for a living could afford. He tapped the screen. "Sea state is going to be a 4, maybe 5. Air assets are grounded. No little birds. No Blackhawks. Which means we insert via Mark 5, said Chief Red O'Malley, Miller's second-in-command, shifting a dip of tobacco in his lip. "Bounce around for 2 hours, vomit our lunch, hit the target, go home." "Negative," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. "We're scrubbing the sniper element." Vance's eyes narrowed. She didn't move, but the air around her seemed to tighten. Miller turned, finally acknowledging her existence. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her boots, then her rank insignia, then the space above her head. "No offense, Sergeant Vance, but the Mark 5 is at capacity with the assault element. And if we have to swim, which is a non-zero probability in this weather, I can't have anyone dragging." "Dragging, sir?" Vance's voice was soft, melodic, and utterly devoid of warmth. "It's physics, Vance," Miller said, crossing his arms. "You're what? 130 dripping wet? The gear weighs 60. The current in the Black Gap runs at 4 knots. I'm not risking my guys to fish you out." The room went quiet. The 6 other SEALs focused intently on their boots or their weapons. They knew Vance. They knew she could shoot the wings off a fly at 1,000 yards. But they also knew the ocean didn't care about marksmanship. It cared about mass and lung capacity. "I don't need fishing out, Commander," Vance said, stepping forward. "And you need eyes. If air is grounded, you have no ISR, no drones, no overwatch. You go in blind, You walk into a meat grinder. The target, General Kale, travels with a convoy, not one boat, 6. We can handle 6 boats, Red grunted. In the dark? In a storm? With rain masking their thermal signatures? Vance challenged, her gaze locking onto Miller's. You need a localized spotter, someone to shut down the engines before they get within RPG range of your assault craft. I can carry the Mk-13. It's compact. I can swim the drag bag. Miller laughed, a short, sharp bark. You ever swim the gap, Vance? No, sir. It's not a pool in Quantico. It's a washing machine filled with sharks and diesel fuel. If the boat breaks, we swim. And you? He shook his head. You stay here. Monitor comms. The door to the TOC opened, slamming shut against the wind outside. Major Halloway, the intel officer, walked in, his face pale. Change of plans, gentlemen. And lady, Halloway said, dropping a folder on the table. Intercept chatter confirms Kale isn't just moving narcotics. He's moving precursor chemicals. VX grade. The mood in the room shifted from relaxed arrogance to razor-wire tension. If that convoy reaches open water, they transfer the payload to a freighter, and it's gone, Halloway continued. Rules of engagement have shifted. This is no longer a capture, shock, kill. This is an interdiction. We sink them. All of them. Positive identification, PID, is mandatory before engagement to ensure no civilians are used as shields. Miller looked at the map. Sink 6 boats? We don't have enough heavy weapons on 1 Mark V to guarantee that before they scatter. You need a precision force multiplier, Vance said. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply stated a tactical fact. You need someone to crack the engine blocks from a standoff distance while you close in. I can put 300 Winchester Magnum rounds through those cowlings from 800 meters. You can't do that with M4s bouncing on a wave. Miller stared at the map, then at the storm raging outside the window, and finally at Vance. He looked for fear in her eyes. He found only a cold, hard calculation. 5 minutes, Miller said, his voice tight. You have 5 minutes to gear up. If you're late, we leave. If you fall behind in the water, we cut you loose. Do you copy? Solid copy, sir, Vance said. And Vance? Miller warned, his finger pointing at her chest. Don't make me write a letter to your mother explaining why you drowned. You won't have to write anything, sir, Vance said, turning on her heel. I write my own letters. She walked out into the rain, the heavy drops hitting her like lead shot. She had won the seat on the boat. Now she just had to survive the ocean. The Mark V Special Operations craft was not designed for comfort. It was a confused amalgam of horsepower and Kevlar designed to break things, including the spines of the men riding inside it. As the vessel cleared the breakwater of the base and hit the open chaos of the Sulu Sea, the world tilted 45 degrees. Vance sat strapped into the shock-mitigating seat near the stern, her body tense, anticipating the impacts. The boat launched off the crest of a 12-foot swell and hung in the air for a sickening, weightless second before slamming down into the trough. The hull shuddered with a sound like a sledgehammer hitting a steel drum. Check gear! Miller's voice crackled over the internal comms, barely audible over the roar of the twin MTU diesel engines and the hammering rain. Vance checked her drag bag for the 10th time. It was a chaotic bundle of waterproof Cordura, containing her Mk-13 Mod 7 sniper rifle, ammunition, spotting scope, and thermal imager. She had lashed it to the deck webbing with 2 extra carabiners. If the boat rolled, the bag stayed. If the bag went over, she was useless. Opposite her, Red O'Malley was turning a shade of green that matched the tactical lighting of the cabin. He gripped the grab bar with white knuckles, his eyes fixed on a point on the floor. Even the elite got seasick, though they would die before admitting it. Vance felt the nausea rise in her own throat, a sour mix of bile and adrenaline, but she swallowed it down. She focused on the rhythmic breathing techniques she used behind the scope. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. "Skipper, radar is cluttered," the coxswain shouted from the helm. "Rain is too heavy. I'm getting ghost returns everywhere. I can't see the debris field." "Keep pushing," Miller ordered. "We have a time on target to meet. If we miss the window, Kyle walks." The boat surged forward again, blind in the storm. The darkness outside the small, reinforced windows was absolute, broken only by the white foam of waves crashing over the bow. The sea state wasn't a 4 anymore. It was pushing a 6, very rough on the Douglas scale, bordering on high. The waves were 18 feet tall, steep, and breaking. Vance looked at her wrist. Altimeter, barometer. The pressure was dropping fast. The typhoon was accelerating. Suddenly, a horrific grinding noise tore through the vessel, vibrating up through the deck plates and into their boots. It sounded like metal being fed into a wood chipper. The high-pitched whine of the starboard engine faltered, sputtered, and then died. "Starboard engine down! High temp alarm!" the engineer yelled. Before Miller could respond, the port engine screamed in protest and seized. The violent forward momentum vanished instantly, replaced by the terrifying lurching sensation of a boat at the mercy of the sea. Silence fell over the cabin, save for the wind howling outside and the slap of water against the hull. "Status!" Miller unbuckled and scrambled toward the helm, fighting gravity as the boat listed heavily to port. "Intakes are clogged, sir," the engineer reported, his hands flying over the diagnostic panel. "We must have sucked up a drift net or palm fronds. Cooling system is dry. Engines overheated and safeties tripped. We are dead stick." The boat swung broadside to the waves. A massive swell hit them beam on, rolling the Mark V nearly 60 degrees. Equipment cases slid across the deck. Vance slammed her boot against the bulkhead to brace herself, her hand shooting out to grab the webbing of her drag bag. "Restart them," Miller commanded. "I can't, sir. Not without going outside and clearing the impellers manually. In this sea state? That's a 2-hour job minimum." Miller slammed his fist against the bulkhead. "We are 3 miles out. The convoy passes the lighthouse in 90 minutes. We can drift," Red suggested, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Current is pushing us south." "South takes us away from the objective," Vance spoke up. Her voice was steady, cutting through the rising panic in the cramped cabin. She hadn't unbuckled. She was looking at the laminates of the tidal charts strapped to her thigh. "The rip current in the Black Gap pushes northeast, directly into the channel. But we aren't in the gap yet. We're in the dead zone." Miller turned to her, his face illuminated by the red emergency lights. "So?" "So the boat isn't going anywhere, sir. We are dead in the water 3 miles from the target." Vance looked up, meeting his gaze. "The mission is scrubbed." The word hung in the air. Scrubbed. Failure before a single shot was fired. For a unit like SEAL Team 4, weather was an excuse, not a reason, but physics was absolute. "Get on the SATCOM," Miller told the comms guy. "Tell HQ we have a mechanical, request immediate extraction." "Sir," the comms guy replied, pressing his headset to his ear. "Atmospherics are killing the signal. I can't get a handshake with the bird. We're dark. No engines, no comms, drifting in a typhoon." Vance watched the men. She saw the frustration, the anger, the denial. They were warriors looking for a fight, and they had. been defeated by seaweed and plastic trash. They were checking their weapons, adjusting their armor, doing busy work to avoid the reality. She didn't move. She just stared at the GPS repeater on the wall. Distance to objective, 3.1 nautical miles. She did the math in her head. 3 miles, in a storm, with gear, impossible. But if they could drift a mile closer, if they could hit the edge of the rip current she had studied, it would cut the distance. "Commander," Vance said. Miller ignored her, staring out the window at the black wall of water. "Commander," she said again, louder. "What, Vance?" he snapped. "You want to say, 'I told you so'? Go ahead." "No, sir. I want to say that the current speed is 4 knots. If we deploy the sea anchor to stabilize the bow, we might drift into the intake of the gap in 20 minutes. "And then what?" Miller asked. "We wave at them as they drive by?" "No," Vance said. She unbuckled her harness and stood up. The floor pitched beneath her, but her sea legs held. She walked over to the chart table and placed a finger on the map. "Then we are 2 miles out, and 2 miles is swimmable." Red snorted from the corner. "You're out of your mind, girl. Nobody swims the Black Gap." Vance looked at the heavy, bearded men around her. They were weighed down by plate carriers, ammunition, helmets, and pride. She looked at her own slim frame, encased in a wetsuit under her camis. "I didn't say we swim it," she said quietly. Miller looked at her, really looked at her, for the second time that night. The skepticism was still there, but beneath it, something else was forming. Desperation. "You're talking about suicide," Miller said. "I'm talking about the mission," Vance corrected. She reached down and tightened the straps on her drag bag. "And right now, I'm the only asset you have that floats." The silence inside the Mark V cabin was heavier than the storm raging outside. It was the silence of alpha predators who had suddenly found themselves defanged. Miller stared at Vance as if she had just suggested they sprout wings and fly to the target. 2 miles, Miller repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You want to swim 2 miles in open ocean at night in a typhoon. That's your plan?" "It's the only plan," Vance replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking her heart rate. She pointed to the laminated chart on the table. "Look at the bathymetry, sir. The Black Gap isn't just a channel. It's a funnel. The storm surge is pushing water into the strait, creating a hydraulic head. That water has to go somewhere." She traced a line with a gloved finger. "There's a rip current forming off the southern reef. It's violent, usually avoided. But right now, it's moving at approximately 4 knots. Northwest." Red O'Malley leaned in, his face inches from hers. "A rip current drags you out to sea, Vance. It doesn't drop you off at the bus stop." "Usually, yes," Vance countered, not backing down. "But because of the unique topography of the lighthouse shoal, here, the current deflects. It wraps around the base of the lighthouse before dissipating into the deep channel. It's a conveyor belt. If I jump now, I don't have to swim against the water. I ride it." "You ride it right into the rocks," Miller said, shaking his head. "Or you miss the deflection point and drift halfway to Malaysia. In this visibility, you won't even see the lighthouse until you smash into it." "I have a wrist-mounted GPS and a compass," Vance said. "I know the headings." "Electronics fail," Miller snapped. "You know what doesn't fail? Hypothermia. The water temp is 70 degrees. Sounds warm, but with wind chill and submersion, you'll be shivering in 20 minutes, incompetent in 40, dead in 60. He looked around the room at his men. They were the best operators in the Navy. but they were built for direct action. Door-kicking, heavy weapons, short, violent bursts of energy. They were carrying 80 pounds of kit. To swim 2 miles, they would have to strip down to wetsuits, leaving their armor and heavy comms behind. They would arrive at the target naked and exhausted. "My team isn't doing it," Miller said flatly. "I'm not sending 6 men into the grinder on a hunch." "I didn't ask for 6 men," Vance said. "I asked for permission to go." A laugh rippled through the back of the cabin. It was Tex, the team's breacher. "You? You can't swim 2 miles, Ghost? No offense, but look at you. You barely have the body mass to keep warm. The drag on that rifle case alone will drown you in 10 minutes. Vance turned to Tex. Her expression didn't change. "I was a competitive swimmer before I enlisted. I hold the division record for the 5K open water, without fins." "That was in a pool, or a lake," Tex sneered. "This is the Sulu Sea." "And the rifle case is buoyant," Vance continued, ignoring him. "It floats. I don't carry it, I tow it. It adds drag, yes, but it doesn't add weight." She turned back to Miller. The commander was rubbing his temples, looking at the dead consoles of the boat. The mission clock was ticking down in his head. If they did nothing, General Cale moved the chemicals. Thousands could die. The failure would be on Miller's record. "If you go," Miller said slowly, "you are completely alone. No comms relay until you hit the lighthouse. No extraction if you cramp up. No rescue if a shark decides you look like a seal." "I know the risks." "Do you?" Miller stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If you get into trouble out there, Vance, do not, I repeat, do not key your radio and scream for help. Because I can't come get you. And I won't have my men listening to you drown. If you go silent." It was a brutal, pragmatic command. It was the kind of thing that separated the operators from the soldiers. Vance felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He was telling her that her life was already written off as an expenditure. "I understand, sir," she said. "I'll go silent." Miller studied her face for a long moment, looking for a crack in the armor. He was expecting her to blink, to realize the absurdity of what she was proposing and back down. He wanted her to back down so he could call the mission scrubbed with a clear conscience. She didn't blink. "Fine," Miller grunted, turning away. "You have green light, but I'm logging this as your initiative. If you die, it's not on my command." "Understood." Vance didn't waste a second. She knelt on the vibrating deck and began stripping off her gear. The heavy plate carrier, the helmet, the extra magazines, all of it came off, revealing the black neoprene wetsuit beneath. She kept her harness, her knife, and the bare essentials. She checked the seal on the drag bag, tightening the valves on the MK-13 case until her fingers hurt. The SEALs watched her. The mockery had faded, replaced by a morbid curiosity. They were watching someone prepare for their own execution. Red O'Malley walked over and handed her a small IR strobe. "If you actually make it, if you secure the perch, light this up. We'll try to get the engines running. Maybe we can come pick up the pieces." "I'll light it up when the targets are down," Vance said, clipping the strobe to her shoulder. She moved to the rear deck. The engineer opened the hatch, and the roar of the storm flooded the cabin. Rain lashed in instantly, soaking everything. The ocean looked like a black, heaving beast, white foam tearing across the surface like jagged teeth. Vance looked out at the void. The waves were towering walls of water. There was no horizon, no light, nothing but violence. 2 miles, Tex muttered from behind her, shaking his head. She's gonna turn back in 5 minutes. Vance pulled her mask down over her eyes and bit onto her snorkel. She didn't look back at them. She didn't say goodbye. She sat on the gunwale, timed the rise of the swell, and rolled backward into the abyss. The water hit her like a physical blow, cold and crushing. The darkness swallowed her instantly. The transition from the chaotic noise of the Mark V to the underwater world was instantaneous and violent. One moment, there was the roar of wind and the shouting of men. The next, there was only the crushing, muffled roar of turbulence. Vance hit the water hard. The air was punched from her lungs by the thermal shock. The water wasn't just cold, it was a physical aggressor, 70 degrees of liquid entropy that instantly began leaching the heat from her core. She plummeted 10 feet down, the darkness total, her equilibrium spinning wildly. Panic, the lizard brain reflex, flared hot in her chest. Up! Get up! She kicked hard, her fins biting into the water, and broke the surface, gasping. Wave immediately slapped her in the face, forcing a mouthful of brine and diesel fuel down her throat. She gagged, spitting out the vile mixture, her eyes stinging despite the mask. The Mark V was a dark, heaving shadow looming above her, pitching violently in the swell. The steel hull groaned as it slammed down, sending a shockwave of displaced water that shoved Vance backward. The bag. Where is the bag? She reached behind her, fumbling for the tow line. The drag bag containing the Mk-13 sniper rifle was her lifeline, and her anchor. If it had tangled during the entry, it would drag her down to the bottom. Her fingers brushed the nylon webbing. It was taut. The bag was floating, bobbing aggressively 5 feet behind her, jerking at her waist harness with every wave. "Vance!" a voice shouted from the boat, barely audible over the wind. A beam of light cut through the rain, sweeping the water frantically. "Vance, do you have the line?" She looked down at her chest. A thin yellow safety tether still connected her carabiner to the railing of the Mark V. It was the protocol. Never detach until you are stable. But the boat was drifting south, dragging her with it, fighting the very current she needed to catch. The tether went taut, jerking her violently toward the steel hull. She saw the massive cavitation plate of the outboard engine rising and falling like a guillotine just yards away. If the boat rolled, she would be crushed. Cut it. The thought was clinical, devoid of emotion. She didn't have time to unclasp the carabiner under this tension. She reached for the dive knife strapped to her calf, the blade rasping out of the Kydex sheath. "Vance! Grab the ladder!" The voice screamed again. It was Miller. He sounded small, insignificant against the ocean. She didn't look up. She slashed the yellow webbing in one fluid motion. The tension snapped. The connection to the world of men, of safety, of backup was severed. She was instantly swept away from the hull by the receding swell. The light from the boat swept over her one last time, illuminating her white-knuckled grip on the knife, and then lost her. She was alone. The darkness was absolute. The sky was a heavy blanket of gray clouds that blocked out the moon and stars. The ocean was a black void. Without a horizon, vertigo set in immediately. She felt like she was falling through space. Focus, orient. Vance rolled onto her back, forcing her breathing to slow. In, out, in, out. She checked her wrist compass. The glowing radium dial was a faint green eye in the dark. Northeast, 045 degrees. She kicked, testing the weight of the drag bag. It was heavy, a dead weight pulling at her hips, threatening to flip her over. She had to find the rhythm. Kick, glide, wait for the tug, kick again. If she fought the bag, she would burn out in 10 minutes. She had to let it follow her, not drag it. She dipped her face into the water, starting the long, monotonous stroke. The water around her was alive with bioluminescence, tiny sparks of green light that flared with every movement of her fins. It was beautiful and terrifying. It meant everything she did was visible to anything looking up from the depths. A large swell lifted her up, and then dropped her into a trough so deep the wind cut out completely. For a few seconds, in the valley of the waves, there was a terrifying silence, just the slosh of water and the sound of her own heart hammering in her ears. She thought of the seals in the cabin. They were probably shaking their heads right now, betting on how long she would last. They thought she was trying to prove something to them. They were wrong. She wasn't swimming for their respect. She was swimming because the math said it was possible, and the mission said it was necessary. But the math hadn't accounted for the loneliness. It was a crushing, suffocating isolation. There was no radio chatter, no engine hum, just the infinite black. A piece of drift kelp brushed against her cheek, slimy and cold, and she nearly screamed, her hand jerking toward her knife again. "Stop it! It's just weed. Control your heart rate." She forced herself to visualize the lighthouse, the rusted iron stairs, the smell of guano, the cold steel of the trigger. She built the destination in her mind, brick by brick, to keep the panic at bay. She checked the compass again. She was drifting fast. The current had grabbed her. Here we go, she thought, gritting her teeth against the regulator. The ride begins. She put her head down and swam into the void, a single speck of heat in a cold, indifferent ocean. The Mark V was gone. There was only the swim. The ocean changed texture. That was the first warning. The choppy, confused violence of the surface chop smoothed out into long, muscular undulations that felt less like waves and more like the heaving flanks of a massive animal. Vance felt the water grab her. It wasn't a drift anymore. It was a seizure. The rip current off the southern reef had her, and it was accelerating. She checked her wrist compass, shielding the faint radium glow with her hand. Heading 0 to 30, she was moving northeast, exactly as she had calculated, but the speed was wrong. The sensation of speed in the water is deceptive, usually measured by the passing of bubbles or debris, but here, in the pitch black, she measured it by the drag on her hips. The rifle case, tethered behind her, was humming, the nylon straps vibrating against her wetsuit like a guitar string under tension. She was moving too fast. Velocity 4 knots? No. This is closer to 6. The storm surge had supercharged the channel. She was being shot out of a cannon. Vance rolled onto her side, switching to a combat side stroke to keep her profile low. If she fought the current, she would burn her glycogen stores in minutes. The trick was to angle against it, ferrying across the flow, like a kayaker crossing a river, letting the vector math do the work. She finned hard, her quadriceps burning with the lactic acid buildup, counting her kicks. 1, 2, 3, glide. 1, 2, 3, glide. Visibility was 0. The rain hammered the surface, creating a deafening white noise that drowned out her own breathing. Every few minutes, a rogue wave would break over her, burying her deep in the foam, spinning her disorientingly before the buoyancy of the wetsuit popped her back up. Then she hit the debris field. The typhoon had scoured the coast, dragging trees, trash, and fishing nets into the channel. The rip current acted as a funnel for all of it. Something hard slammed into her shoulder, a coconut or a piece of wood, numbing her arm instantly. Before she could recover, a heavy, sodden weight draped over her head. It smelled of rot and dead fish, a ghost net. Panic, sharp and electric, spiked in her chest. The netting snagged on her snorkel, then her harness. The drag bag behind her caught a tangle of the mesh, and suddenly she was anchored. The current didn't stop, but she did. The water piled up behind her, driving her under. She was being keel-hauled by the ocean. Vance thrashed, her hand going for her knife, but the net was everywhere, slimy and impossible to grip. She was 5 feet under, then 10. The pressure built in her ears. The regulator was ripped from her mouth, and she swallowed a lungful of seawater. Darkness. Spinning. For a split second, she wasn't in the Sulu Sea. She was back in the pool at Coronado, hands and feet bound, lungs burning, at the bottom of the deep end. The instructors were watching from the deck, impassive. "Don't struggle," they had said. "Panic burns oxygen. Accept the water, be the water, drown-proofing." The lesson wasn't about swimming, it was about dying gracefully until you found a way to live. Vance stopped thrashing. She went limp in the grip of the net. The current tumbled her, but by relaxing, she created slack. She felt the mesh loosen around her neck. Her hand found the knife hilt. She didn't slash wildly. She located the tension point near her waist harness and sawed. 1 stroke. 2. The nylon rope parted with a dull thwack. She kicked upward, bursting through the surface, gasping for air that was half water, half spray. She coughed violently, expelling the brine, her throat raw. She was free. She scrambled to check her gear. Rifle case, still attached. Fins, on, knife, in hand. She looked at her left wrist. The strap of her Garmin Fortrex GPS had been sheared off by the net. The screen, her only way of knowing exactly how far she had drifted and exactly when to cut out of the current, was gone, sunk to the bottom of the black gap. "Damn it," she hissed, the words lost to the wind. She was flying blind. No GPS, no visual references, just a compass and a mental stopwatch that had been interrupted by a near drowning. She looked at the compass on her right wrist. It was still there, the needle dancing erratically as the magnetic fields of the storm and the tossing of the waves interfered. She had to trust it. She had to trust her internal clock. How long was I under? 30 seconds? A minute? If she miscalculated, she would overshoot the lighthouse. If she missed the lighthouse, the current would carry her out into the open Mindanao Sea, where the swells were 30 feet high and no ship would ever find her. Vance grit her teeth, shoved the regulator back into her mouth, and put her face back in the water. She couldn't think about the void waiting for her. She had to fin. She had to find the rock in the river. She kicked harder, driving herself into the black, counting the seconds in her head, trying to outrun the doubt that was colder than the water. 1, 2, 3, glide. The current began to slow, the violent rushing water broadening out as the channel widened. Vance should have felt relief, but as the turbulence faded, a new, heavier silence pressed in. She was entering the deep channel, the section of the strait the locals called Lubang Hu, the shark pit. This area was a convergence zone for nutrient-rich runoff, attracting bait fish, which in turn attracted the oceanic whitetips and tiger sharks that patrolled the Sulu Sea. Vance knew the statistics. She knew the probability of an attack was statistically low. But statistics meant nothing when you were a solitary, warm-blooded, seal-shaped object kicking on the surface of a pitch-black ocean. She stopped kicking, letting her momentum carry her. Splash discipline was paramount now. Every splash was a dinner bell. She moved her fins in slow, deliberate sculling motions, keeping them submerged, minimizing the cavitation. "Don't think about it," she commanded herself, "but the brain is a traitor in the dark." She thought about the bull shark's bumping technique, the investigative nudge before the bite. She thought about the tiger shark's ability to bite through turtle shells. She thought about the exposed skin of her face and hands, glowing white in the spectral vision of a predator. She tightened her grip on the dive knife. It was a laughable defense. 3 inches of steel against 2 tons of muscle and cartilage. But it was better than nothing. She checked her depth gauge, though she couldn't see it. She felt the depth. The water here felt ancient and cold. The bioluminescence had faded, leaving her in a void so complete she couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed. Then, something touched her. It wasn't a drift of water. It was solid. It brushed against her left thigh, starting at the knee and sliding up to her hip. It was heavy, rough like wet sandpaper, and powerful enough to knock her slightly off axis. Vance froze. Every muscle in her body locked up in a rigid spasm of terror. Contact. Left side. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that she felt sure was echoing through the water like a sonar ping. She knew about the ampullae of Lorenzini, the electroreceptors in a shark's snout that could detect the electrical impulses of a beating heart. Slow it down. Slow it down, or you die. She forced herself to go limp, drifting with the swell. If she thrashed, she triggered the predatory response. If she played dead, maybe, just maybe, it would lose interest. She floated there, suspended in the black, waiting for the strike. She imagined the water displacing as the mouth opened. She imagined the tearing. The waiting was worse than the contact. It was a psychological torture that stretched seconds into hours. A minute passed, then 2. Nothing. The water around her remained still. Had it been a current eddy? A hallucination brought on by sensory deprivation? She slowly, infinitesimally, rotated her head to the left. She couldn't use her light. A beam of light in this water would illuminate her position to any smugglers on the surface and attract every fish in the sea. She had to see with her instincts. Then she felt it again. A solid impact on the drag bag trailing behind her. The bag jerked violently. Vance spun in the water, bringing the knife up, her legs pulling under her to protect her femoral arteries. She didn't scream, but the sound was trapped in her throat, a silent vibration of pure fear. She reached out with her free hand, expecting to touch teeth or cold skin. Her fingers brushed against wood. Slimy, waterlogged, rotting wood. It was a tree trunk, a massive piece of drift timber, probably torn from the mangroves by the storm surge, bobbing vertically in the water like a dead sentinel. The rough skin was bark. The jerk was the drag bag snagging on a branch. Vance exhaled, a stream of bubbles rushing past her ears. The relief was so intense it was physically painful. Her muscles, which had been coiled like springs, turned to jelly. She wasn't going to be eaten. It was just debris. She pushed away from the log, untangling the tow line with shaking fingers. She felt foolish, humiliated by her own biology. She was a Force Recon Marine, a scout sniper, a trained killer, and she had almost hyperventilated because of a piece of wood. But as she pushed off, she realized the cost of that fear. The adrenaline dump had been massive. Her body had emptied its reserves of glucose to fuel a fight that never happened. Now the crash was coming. Her arms felt heavy, leaden. The cold, which she had ignored during the panic, came rushing back with a vengeance. Her teeth began to chatter around the regulator, an uncontrollable clacking sound. Hypothermia. Stage 1. She was burning fuel too fast. The fear had cost her warmth. Vance looked at the compass again. The needle drifted lazily. She had lost time. She had lost energy. And she was still alone in the shark pit. She forced her legs to move. The kick was weaker now, less precise. The rhythm was broken. Move, she told herself. If you stop moving, the cold wins. If the cold wins, you sink. She resumed the stroke, but the shadows in the water seemed darker now, and every ripple felt like a fin. The ocean had stripped away her armor, leaving her feeling small, soft, and very, very edible. The wall didn't appear as a barrier. It appeared as a lie. Vance was swimming, or she thought she was swimming, but the connection between her brain and her limbs had frayed. The electrical signals sent from her cortex to her quadriceps were arriving garbled, weak, and intermittent. She had been in the water for 80 minutes. The human body, even one conditioned by the core, has a thermal breaking point. Her core temperature had dropped below 95 degrees. The shivering, which had been violent enough to rattle her teeth against the regulator mouthpiece, had stopped. That was the lie. The cessation of shivering wasn't relief. It was the body surrendering. It was the physiological shutdown of heat production to preserve the vital organs. Vance knew this. She had sat through the PowerPoint presentations on cold water immersion. She knew that when the pain stopped, you were dying. Then, the cramp hit. It started in her right calf, a knot of muscle twisting so violently it felt like a sniper round had shattered the fibula. The pain was blinding, absolute. It doubled her over in the water, her leg seizing into a rigid, useless anchor. She gasped, inhaling a spray of salt water, and choked. Her rhythm broke. The heavy drag bag, no longer pulled by forward momentum, drifted into her back, pushing her face underwater. She thrashed, trying to massage the knot through the thick neoprene of the wetsuit, but her hands were clumsy claws, devoid of sensation. She couldn't feel her fingers. She couldn't feel the knife she was still clutching. "Let go," a voice whispered. "Just stop kicking. It's warm down there." The water did feel warm. It felt like a bath. It was the most seductive sensation she had ever felt. The illusion of comfort as her capillaries dilated in a final, fatal error. Paradoxical undressing. Her brain was telling her she was overheating. Vance drifted, her eyes closed. The darkness behind her eyelids was brighter than the ocean. "I told you, didn't I?" The voice was clear, cutting through the roar of the ocean. It wasn't inside her head. It was right next to her ear. Vance opened her eyes. Treading water next to her, dry and perfectly pressed in his dress blues, was Gunnery Sergeant Miller. Not the SEAL commander, but her old DI from Paris Island. He was walking on the water, looking down at her with a look of utter, disappointed boredom. "Females in the infantry," the phantom gunny scoffed, checking his watch. "Biology, Vance. It's just biology. You don't have the bone density. You don't have the mass. You're just a little girl playing dress-up in a man's ocean." Vance blinked. She knew he wasn't there. She knew he was a synapse misfiring in a hypothermic brain. But the hatred, the pure, distilled venom she felt for that tone of voice, was real. "Look at you," the phantom sneered. "Curled up like a shrimp. You gonna cry? You gonna ring the bell? Go ahead. Ring it. Miller is waiting to say, 'I told you so.' The whole damn Navy is waiting." Ring the bell. The image of the brass bell at Bud S., the bell you rang to quit, flashed in her mind. Something snapped in her chest. It wasn't energy. She had no energy left. It was spite. Pure, molten rage. "No!" She gargled into the regulator. She grabbed her seized leg with both hands and forced the foot to flex, tearing the muscle fibers apart to release the knot. The pain was nauseating, white-hot and clarifying. It cut through the hypothermic fog like a flare. "I don't quit," she hissed. The phantom gunny shimmered and vanished into sea foam. Vance rolled onto her stomach. Her right leg was useless, a dead weight dragging behind her. She would have to swim with one leg and her arms. It was inefficient. It was agonizing. But she was awake now. She dug her hands into the water, pulling with her lats, dragging her broken body through the heavy swells. Pull, glide, pull, glide. She visualized Miller's face. She visualized the smirk on Tex's face. She used their doubt as kindling to keep her core burning. She checked the compass. 045. Keep moving. 10 minutes later, or maybe an hour, time had no meaning. The darkness ahead of her shifted. It wasn't a light. It was an absence of stars. A solid vertical shadow blacker than the sky. It rose from the churning water like a tombstone. The lighthouse. It was a jagged, ruined skeleton of iron and concrete, leaning precariously on a submerged reef. The waves were smashing against its base, sending geysers of white spray 50 feet into the air. The roar was deafening, the sound of the ocean trying to pulverize the rock. It was the ugliest thing she had ever seen. It was beautiful. Vance stopped swimming, treading water with her good leg. She was drifting rapidly toward it. The current she had ridden was now trying to smash her against the jagged pilings of the foundation. She had made it across the void. She had survived the predators and the cold. But now she had to catch a wet, barnacle-encrusted ladder on a moving target, while the ocean tried to crush her against it. She took a breath, timing the swell. "One last push," she whispered to the freezing dark. She finned hard, aiming for the rusted iron legs of the beast. The base of the lighthouse was a kill zone. The concrete foundation, a massive hexagonal block rising from the reef, acted as a breakwater. The incoming swells, traveling unchecked for hundreds of miles, slammed into the obstruction with hydraulic fury. The water didn't just rise, it exploded upward, turning the space around the ladder into a chaotic washing machine of foam and crushing pressure. Vance treaded water 5 yards out, timing the violence. Surge, smash, recede, surge. She had one shot. If she mistimed the approach, the wave would slam her body against the barnacle-encrusted pilings, shredding her wetsuit and the skin beneath like cheese against a grater. If she hesitated, the backwash would drag her into the jagged rocks below the waterline. She watched the rhythm. A massive swell rolled in, lifting her 10 feet in the air. As it crested and began to smash against the concrete, she kicked hard, riding the forward momentum of the trough immediately following it. She hit the rusted iron ladder with a jarring thud. Her hands, numb claws devoid of tactile sensation, slapped against the vertical rails. She didn't feel the metal. She only knew she was holding on because her arms stopped moving. She hooked her good leg through a lower rung, locking herself in just as the water receded. Gravity returned with a vengeance. The drag bag, still tethered to her waist harness, was heavy with water. As the ocean dropped away beneath her, the bag became a 60-pound anchor yanking her hips downward. Her shoulders screamed in protest, the joints popping audibly. "Move!" she grunted, the sound wet and guttural. She couldn't climb with the bag dangling freely. The wind was gusting at 40 knots, swinging the heavy case like a pendulum that threatened to peel her off the rusted iron. With shaking fingers, she unclipped the bag from her waist. She took a nylon runner from her harness, one of the few pieces of gear she had kept, and looped it through the bag's carry handle, then clipped it to her belt. It gave her 3 feet of slack. She would have to drag it up, rung by painful rung. She began the climb. The ladder was a nightmare of corrosion. Decades of salt spray had eaten away the iron, leaving the rungs pitted and flaking. Thick, slimy algae coated every surface. Vance couldn't rely on grip strength. She had none left. She had to hook her elbows over the rungs, hauling herself up with her lats and biceps, dragging her paralyzed right leg. Reach, hook, pull, step. She made it 10 feet, then 20. The water was a churning cauldron below her now, the spray still lashing at her boots. She stopped to secure herself. Her brain was fuzzy, the hypothermia narrowing her focus to a pinpoint. Safety first. She fumbled with a second sling, tying a hasty Prusik knot around the vertical rail of the ladder. It was a friction hitch. It would slide up as she climbed, but lock tight if she fell. It was a mountaineering technique applied to maritime rot, but it was the only insurance she had. She reached for the next rung, 30 feet up. It looked solid enough, though thick with rust scales. She transferred her weight to it, pulling her body up. Crack. There was no warning. The iron rung, eaten through from the inside, disintegrated under her weight. Vance plummeted. The sudden drop shocked her breath away. Her left hand snatched blindly at the air, finding nothing. Her right arm, hooked through the lower rung, took the full force of her falling body weight, plus the rifle bag. Her shoulder wrenched violently, a tearing sensation ripping through her deltoid. She slammed into the ladder structure, her chest impacting the vertical rail. The air left her lungs in a wheezing gasp. The Prusik knot bit into the rail, arresting her fall with a jerk that nearly snapped her spine. She hung there, dangling by the safety line and one arm, suspended 40 feet above the black, churning water. The drag bag swung wildly below her, banging against the concrete shaft of the lighthouse, a metronome of doom. Pull up. She tried. Her arm wouldn't move. The muscle was dead. The pain was distant, dull, overwhelmed by the cold. She looked down. The white foam swirled in the dark, waiting for her. It would be so easy to unclasp the carabiner, to just let go. The swim had been impossible. The climb was impossible. She had done enough. Then she smelled it. The wind shifted, carrying a scent down from the catwalk above. It wasn't just the metallic tang of the storm. It was the acrid ammonia stink of bird guano. Life. There was solid ground up there. A primal, animalistic growl rose in her throat. She swung her legs, ignoring the agony in her cramp-riddled calf, and managed to hook a boot onto a lower crossbar. She pushed. She screamed, a raw, tearing sound that was lost to the wind and drove her body upward. She bypassed the broken rung. She grabbed the next one. The rust flaked off into her eyes, blinding her, but she didn't blink. 10 feet. 5 feet. She reached the top. The ladder terminated at a metal grating, the maintenance catwalk that ringed the lantern room. Vance threw her upper body over the edge of the grating. The metal mesh bit into her chest, cold and hard. It was the most beautiful feeling in the world. She scrambled forward, dragging her legs, dragging the rifle bag, until she was fully on the platform. She rolled onto her back, staring up at the dark, blind glass of the lighthouse lantern. The rain hammered her face. Her chest heaved in spasmodic, shallow gasps. She was bleeding from her hands. her shoulder, her shins. She was freezing to death. But she wasn't in the water. She lay there for a full minute, unable to move, listening to the wind howl through the skeletal structure. "Not done yet," the discipline whispered. "The gun. Check the gun." Vance forced herself to sit up. The world tilted and spun. She grabbed the railing to steady herself. She reached for the drag bag, her fingers fumbling with the waterproof zipper. She had to know. If the seal had failed, if the rifle was soaked or the optic fogged, the climb, the swim, the pain, it was all for nothing. She ripped the bag open. Inside, nestled in the high-density foam, the MK-13 Mod 7 was bone dry. The matte black finish absorbed the faint ambient light. It looked lethal. It looked perfect. Vance slumped back against the lighthouse wall, hugging the rifle case to her chest. A single shivering laugh escaped her lips. She had the high ground. The catwalk was a grid of rusted steel suspended 80 feet above the ocean, exposed to the full ferocity of the typhoon. There was no cover. The wind whipped around the cylindrical tower, accelerating as it curved, creating a vortex that threatened to peel Vance off the grating. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. She crawled instead, dragging the rifle case toward the leeward side of the gallery, seeking a few inches of shelter behind the lantern room's concrete base. She unzipped the case fully. Her hands were foreign objects, stiff, clumsy, and shaking so violently she could hear the bones rattling. She reached for the MK-13 Mod 7. It was a heavy, precision instrument, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. It was built to kill at 1,200 meters, but it required a stable platform. Right now, Vance was a vibrating mess. She tried to deploy the bipod legs. Her thumb slipped off the release button. She tried again. Slipped. She let out a frustrated, guttural cry and slammed her palm against the mechanism, forcing the legs down. She pulled the bolt back to check the chamber. The metallic shuck-clack was the only familiar sound in this hell. But as she tried to shoulder the weapon, the reticle in the Night Force optic danced wildly. She wasn't just shaking, she was convulsing. The crosshairs were jumping 10 feet off target at 100 yards. At 800, she wouldn't even hit the ocean, let alone an engine block. Hypothermia Stage 2. Loss of fine motor control. Violent shivering. She was freezing to death inside her own gear. The wetsuit, designed to keep her warm in the water by trapping a layer of liquid against the skin, was now a death trap. In the wind, the water was evaporating rapidly, sucking the remaining heat from her core like a vacuum. She was wearing a refrigerator. Vance looked down at her chest. She knew what she had to do. The thought alone made her wince. "Do it," she hissed. She dropped the rifle. She unzipped the heavy neoprene wetsuit top, peeling it down over her shoulders. The wind hit her wet skin like a lash of liquid nitrogen. The pain was shocking, instantaneous, and absolute. It felt like being skinned alive. She gritted her teeth so hard she felt a molar crack. She fought the urge to curl into a fetal ball. She stripped the wetsuit down to her waist, leaving her torso exposed to the storm. She grabbed the dry bag liner from the rifle case, a thin, silvered thermal blanket and a microfiber towel. She scrubbed her skin frantically, the towel rough against the numb flesh, removing the salt and the moisture. She dried her arms, her chest, her stomach. The friction generated a tiny, precious spark of heat. She threw the wet neoprene top aside. It was useless now. She wrapped the thermal blanket around her bare torso, then pulled the oversized, waterproof shooting smock she had packed in the bottom of the drag bag over her head. It was thin, but it was windproof, and it was dry. The difference was immediate. The evaporative cooling stopped. Her body heat, what little was left, began to circulate again. The violent convulsions slowed to a manageable rhythmic shivering. Vance picked up the rifle again. She was still shaking, but it was a vibration she could time. She could work with this. She crawled to the railing. The convoy would be coming from the south, entering the black gap where the channel narrowed to 800 yards. She needed a stable rest. The railing was too high for prone, too low for kneeling. She reached into the case and pulled out the tripod with a hog saddle clamp. She set it up, locking the legs low and wide, jamming the rubber feet into the gaps of the metal grating to anchor it. She clamped the rifle into the saddle. Solid. She pressed her eye to the scope. The rubber eyepiece was cold against her socket. She dialed the magnification down to 12x. The field of view was dark, a swirling gray mess of rain and night. She reached forward and flipped the lever on the AN-PVS-27 night vision clip-on mounted in front of her day scope. The world exploded into green. The grain was heavy due to the low ambient light, but the thermal image cut through the rain. She scanned the channel. The water was a turbulent landscape of shifting grays. The white-hot signature of the waves crashing against the rocks looked like spectral fire. She checked her data card. Range to channel center, 820 meters. Wind, full value, left to right. Gusting 25 to 40 m/s. The wind call was a nightmare. A 300 Win Mag bullet would be pushed nearly 4 feet off target at this distance in this wind. She dialed 3.5 mils of windage into the turret, the clicks audible and crisp. It was a guess, an educated guess based on the feel of the storm against her cheek. She would have to adjust on the fly. She settled in behind the gun. She wrapped her legs around the tripod legs, loading the bipod with her body weight. She controlled her breathing. Inhale, pause, exhale. The shivering was still there, a low-level hum in her muscles, but the rifle was steady. The tripod absorbed the vibration. She was no longer a half-drowned rat clinging to a rock. She was a weapon system. She was the final judge of the Sibutu Passage. She waited. 10 minutes passed. The rain soaked her hair, plastering it to her skull. The cold crept back into her fingers. Then she saw it. On the southern horizon of the green phosphor screen, a cluster of heat signatures emerged. They were faint at first, just smudges of white against the gray background. But they grew brighter, hotter. Engines. Vance adjusted the focus. 6 boats, fast movers. They were in a tight column formation, plowing through the heavy swells, their exhaust stacks glowing white-hot in the thermal vision. Target acquired, she whispered to no one. She moved her finger to the trigger guard, feeling the cold steel. The safety was still on. She didn't flick it off yet. She watched them come, letting them enter the kill box, letting them think they had survived the storm. She breathed out, a long, slow stream of vapor that vanished instantly in the gale. Welcome to the gap. The world inside the optic was a grainy, shifting landscape of emerald and black. The AN-PVS-27 clip-on thermal imager was fighting a losing battle against the atmospheric density. The rain was so heavy it acted like a thermal blanket, cooling the heat signatures and washing out the contrast. Vance pressed her eye socket harder against the rubber cup, trying to merge her nervous system with the glass. She controlled her breathing, forcing the shivering to subside for the few crucial seconds of observation. 1, 2, 3. The boats were moving in a tight column, staggered slightly to starboard to avoid each other's wake. They were low-slung, fast-attack craft, modified cigarette boats with reinforced hulls, likely smuggling vessels repurposed for heavy transport. 4, 5, 6. That was the briefing. 6 boats, 12 engines. The target, General Kale, would be in the center, likely boat 3 or 4, surrounded by the security detail. But the line didn't end. 7. Vance froze. A 7th boat, trailing the rear guard, emerged from the rain squall. "Intel failure," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gale. 7 boats meant 14 outboard engines. She had 3 5-round magazines for the Mk13 Mod 7 accessible on the grating, plus 1 in the gun. 16 rounds total immediately available. That left a margin of error of exactly 2 shots. 2 misses, and a boat would escape. If the HVT escaped, the mission was a failure. If the security boats escaped, they would circle back and shred her exposed position with heavy machine guns. She adjusted the focus knob. The image sharpened slightly. She needed positive identification. A thermal blob was just a blob until she saw weapons. The lead boat was massive, riding high in the water. Through the green haze, she saw the distinct heat signature of a Pintle-mounted heavy machine gun on the bow, likely a DSAK or an NSV. The barrel was hot, glowing white against the cool background of the hull. They had been test firing. PID confirmed. Armed combatants. She scanned back to the center of the column. Boat 4 was different. It sat lower in the water, heavier. The heat bloom from its engines was more intense, suggesting up-armored plating adding weight to the vessel. That was the payload. That was Kyle. The wind gusted, shaking the lighthouse. Vance shifted her weight, loading the tripod legs to dampen the vibration. The wind was coming from her left, a full-value crosswind screaming at 35 miles per hour. At 800 meters, the bullet would drift nearly 4 feet. She had to aim at empty space to hit the target. Suddenly, the lead boat cut its speed. The bow dropped into the water, the white wake vanishing. The entire column slowed in reaction, the engines downshifting to a low, menacing rumble that vibrated through the steel of the catwalk. Why are they stopping? Vance held her breath. Had they seen the heat signature of her body on the catwalk? She was wrapped in the thermal blanket, but her face and hands were exposed. A beam of light, blindingly bright even through the side of her vision, erupted from the lead boat. It was a high-intensity spotlight, cutting through the rain like a physical blade. The beam swept the water, checking the channel markers. Then, it tilted up. It crawled up the lighthouse foundation. It hit the broken ladder. It moved up the shaft. Vance shut her eyes tight. The thermal optic would bloom, white out, if the light hit the objective lens directly, blinding her. She buried her face in the stock of the rifle, making herself as small as possible behind the concrete base of the lantern room. Don't move. Movement draws the eye. The light swept over the catwalk. She felt it pass over her like a physical touch, a moment of exposure that made her skin crawl. If the operator down there saw the glint of a lens or the outline of the tripod, she was dead. A 12.7mm round would turn the metal grating she lay on into shrapnel. She counted the seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The engine of the lead boat revved. The spotlight snapped off. The convoy accelerated. They were just checking the landmark. They felt safe. They thought the storm owned the night. Vance opened her eyes and reacquired the sight picture. The boats were picking up speed, the bows lifting as they planed out. They were entering the kill box. She adjusted her windage turret one last time, adding 2 more clicks left. The boats were moving away from her now, quartering slightly. This added a vertical component to the lead. She had to shoot high and left to hit the engine blocks on the right side of the formation. She didn't feel the cold anymore. She didn't feel the exhaustion or the pain in her shoulder. The world had narrowed down to a simple algebraic equation of velocity, distance, and wind. Boat 7, rear engine, she murmured, establishing her firing order. She would start from the back and work forward. If she hit the lead boat first, the convoy would scatter. If she crippled the rear, the others might hesitate, thinking it was a mechanical failure in the storm. Confusion was her ally. She tracked the trailing boat. The twin Yamaha 300s were glowing white squares bobbing in the chop. Up, down, up. Pause. She waited for the top of the swell, the split second where the boat hung suspended in zero gravity before crashing down. She exhaled half her breath. The crosshairs settled on the starboard engine cowling. Send it. The ocean breathed. It was a rhythmic, heaving lung that lifted the targets 8 feet into the air and dropped them back into the darkness. Vance didn't fight the motion. She synced with it. She watched Boat 7, the rearguard vessel, rise on a swell. Rise, hold, drop. There was a fraction of a second at the apex of the wave. The dead time, where vertical velocity hit zero before gravity took over. That was the window. Vance exhaled, emptying her lungs until they burned. The violent shivering that had plagued her for the last hour vanished, replaced by a crystalline, terrifying stillness. Her heart rate dropped. Her finger applied 2 pounds of pressure to the trigger. The crosshair hovered over the starboard cowling of the Yamaha outboard. Click. The Mk13 Mod 7 bucked against her shoulder. The suppressor swallowed the muzzle flash, but the sonic crack of the .300 Winchester Magnum round whipped out over the water, a sharp whip crack that was instantly swallowed by the storm. Vance didn't blink. She cycled the bolt instinctively. Up, back, forward, down. A mechanical movement drilled into her muscle memory until it was faster than thought. She kept her eye glued to the scope, riding the recoil. Through the grainy green thermal image, she saw the result. A white-hot spray of sparks and oil erupted from the back of Boat 7. The engine didn't just die, it shattered. The boat yawed violently to the right, the torque of the remaining port engine spinning it into the path of the following swell. "One," she whispered. She didn't wait to admire the damage. Boat 7 was dead in the water, drifting. The crew was scrambling, likely thinking they had hit debris or suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. They hadn't realized they were under attack. Yet. Vance shifted her hips, dragging the tripod across the grating. She traversed the rifle barrel left, sweeping past the confused middle column all the way to the front. Boat 1, the leader. This was the critical shot. If she took out the rear, they couldn't retreat. If she took out the leader, they couldn't advance. She would turn the channel into a parking lot. Boat 1 was alert now. The sudden loss of the rear guard had been noticed. The spotlight swept backward, searching for their comrade. The lead boat slowed, its bow dropping, creating a smaller, less predictable target. Vance settled the reticle. The wind was gusting harder now, shaking the lighthouse structure. She favored the left edge of the engine block, trusting her wind call. Wait for the pause. The boat dipped into a trough, disappearing from view, then surged upward on a crest of foam. Now. She squeezed. The rifle slammed her shoulder again. The shot felt good. It felt true. 800 meters away, the lead boat's port engine detonated. The thermal image bloomed white as the fuel line ignited, sending a flare of heat into the night sky. The boat slewed sideways, losing steering control, and slammed broadside into the next wave. Chaos erupted. The convoy compressed. The 4 boats in the middle, including the high-value target, were now trapped between a drifting wreck in the rear and a burning obstruction in the front. They were boxed in. 2. Vance counted, racking the bolt again. The element of surprise evaporated. The sound of the second impact and the subsequent fire on the lead boat was unmistakable. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This was contact. Flares popped from the decks of the center boats, hissing red magnesium that fizzled in the rain. Automatic weapons fire began to sparkle from the convoy, aimless bursts of tracer rounds stitching the water. They didn't know where the fire was coming from. They were shooting at ghosts. Vance didn't panic. She didn't hurry. She lay on the freezing metal grating, a solitary agent of entropy, methodically working the bolt. She was no longer Elena Vance. She was no longer the girl who nearly drowned in the rip current. She was a machine that turned wind and distance into violence. She shifted her aim to Boat 7 again. The remaining port engine was thrashing, trying to push the disabled boat out of the kill zone. Not today, she lined up the shot. The heat signature was clear. Crack. The third round struck the lower unit of the outboard. The propeller sheared off, and the engine over-revved with a thermal spike before seizing. Boat 7 was now dead weight, a drifting obstacle clogging the exit. Vance ejected the spent casing. It pinged off the metal railing, steaming in the cold rain. The smell of burnt propellant filled her nose, sharp, chemical, and grounding. It was the smell of her office. She looked at the center of the confusion. Boat 4, the HVT, was trying to maneuver around the lead wreck. "No, you don't," she breathed. She had 10 rounds left in her magazines. She had 4 boats to cripple, and now, the heavy machine gun on the lead boat was traversing, the gunner realizing that the death was coming from above. The tracers started to lift. They were hunting for the lighthouse. Vance narrowed her eyes. The game had changed. It was no longer an ambush. It was a duel. The darkness around Vance shattered. The DSHK heavy machine gun on the bow of the crippled lead boat opened up. The gunner, firing blindly at the muzzle flash he had seen 80 feet above him, walked the rounds up the lighthouse tower. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of 12.7mm rounds impacting concrete was not a crack. It was a series of sledgehammer blows that vibrated through the entire structure. Dust and chips of cement rained down from the lantern room above, peppering Vance's back. "Priority target," Vance said, her voice flat, devoid of fear. She didn't duck. Ducking meant losing the sight picture. If she lost the picture, she lost the initiative. If she lost the initiative, the sheer volume of fire would pin her down until they could flank her. She traversed the rifle slightly right. The Sijatsu thermal scope showed the gunner as a bright white torso behind the glowing barrel of the heavy machine gun. He was spraying wildly, the tracers arcing through the rain like angry hornets. Distance, 780 meters. Wind, holding. She ignored the rounds impacting the walkway 3 feet to her left. She focused on the center of mass of the white heat signature. Squeeze. The MK-13 kicked. Down below, the gunner crumpled, falling backward over the ammo can. The stream of heavy tracers cut out instantly. "Gun down," she whispered. She grabbed the rifle by the forend and rolled right, dragging the heavy weapon across the metal grating. Shoot and scoot. Never fire twice from the exact same inch of space when the enemy is awake. The other boats had found her now. They couldn't see her, but they knew the angle. Small arms fire, AK-47s and PKMs, began to rake the top of the lighthouse. The air snapped with the supersonic cracks of bullets passing inches overhead. It sounded like a whip being cracked directly in her ear canal. Vance ignored it. She reset the tripod behind a rusted stanchion. Boat 2 and Boat 6 were trying to peel off, accelerating to flank the wreckage of the lead boat. They were trying to screen the HVT vessel in the center. "No escape," Vance murmured. She cycled the bolt. She was in a rhythm now, a fugue state where the conscious mind receded and muscle memory took the controls. She wasn't thinking about the cold, or the swim, or the fact that she was outnumbered 50-1. She was thinking about lead angles. She tracked Boat 2. It was surging forward, burying its nose in a wave. This exposed the props. Wait for the lift. The boat rose. The props cleared the water, spinning wildly. Crack. The shot was perfect. It smashed the engine cowling, shattering the spark plugs and fuel rail. The engine died instantly. Boat 2 slewed sideways, dead in the water. Vance racked the bolt. Clack, clack. Boat 6 was firing back. A stream of green tracer fire erupted from its deck, seeking her out. A round impacted the iron railing 6 inches from her face. The metal exploded. A shard of rusted iron and copper jacket, razor-sharp and hot, sliced across Vance's right cheek, just below the eye. The impact snapped her head back. The world spun. For a second, the green glow of the night vision vanished, replaced by black spots. A warm, wet sensation spread instantly across her face, dripping down her chin and onto her neck. She tasted copper. She blinked, clearing the tears from her eyes. She touched her cheek with a gloved hand. It came away black in the darkness, but she knew it was red. She didn't gasp. She didn't check the wound. She didn't care. "Correction," she said, spitting blood onto the grating. "Windage is good." She settled back behind the scope. The pain was distant, belonging to someone else. She was just the operator of the machine. The machine needed to fire. She found Boat 6. The shooter was standing on the stern, firing an RPK. She ignored him. He was a distraction. She aimed at the engine block beneath him. Crack! The engine exploded. The shooter was thrown into the water by the sudden deceleration. Rack, clack. 4 down. The magazine was dry. Vance rolled onto her back, keeping low as a fresh volley of fire chewed up the concrete lip of the platform above her head. She fumbled for a fresh magazine from her chest rig. Her fingers were stiff, coated in a mixture of gun oil, salt water, and her own blood. She stripped the empty mag. She jammed the fresh 5-round box into the well, slamming it home with the heel of her hand. Bolt forward, locked. She rolled back into position. The scene below was a graveyard of momentum. 4 boats were drifting helplessly, crashing into each other in the swells. Men were shouting, their voices faint screams carried by the wind. The water was slick with fuel. But 2 boats were still moving. Boat 3, another escort, and Boat 4, the Iron Eel, the target. They were using the chaos as cover, weaving through the disabled vessels, pushing their engines to the red line. They were 300 yards from the exit of the channel. If they cleared the point, they would be in open water, and she would lose the angle. "Not yet," Vance hissed. She targeted Boat 3. It was shielding the HVT, zigzagging erratically. She took a breath. The lighthouse shook as a rogue wave smashed into the foundation below, the vibration traveling up through her elbows. She rode the tremor. Crack. A miss. The round splashed water just aft of the prop. Damn. She racked the bolt violently. She had misread the boat's speed. They were pushing 40 knots now. She adjusted her lead. She didn't wait for the perfect wave. She took the snapshot. Crack! The round punched through the fiberglass cover of the starboard engine on Boat 3. Smoke poured out. The boat listed, slowing down, but not stopping. Crack! The second shot drilled the port engine. Boat 3 died. That left one. The HVT, General Kale. He was alone now, his shield stripped away. The heavy armored boat was roaring toward the open sea, its twin 350 horsepower engines churning the water white. Vance looked at her data card. She didn't need it. She knew the dope. She had 2 rounds left in the gun. 1 boat, and the enemy was no longer shooting back. They were running. She wiped the blood from her eye with her sleeve, smearing it across the optic lens. But she didn't wipe it off. She looked through the red smear. "Just you and me," she whispered. General Kale's pilot was good. He wasn't panicking like the others. Through the blood-smeared ocular of the thermal scope, Vance watched the final target. Boat 4, the Iron Eel, execute a hard starboard turn. The pilot was using the drifting, burning hulk of the lead boat as a physical shield, keeping the heavy steel hull between his engines and the lighthouse. He was weaving, throttles feathered, waiting for the gap in the reef to open up. Once he cleared the debris field, he would have a straight shot into the deep black water of the Mindanao Trench. If he hit open water, he would disappear. The storm would hide his wake, and the chemicals he carried would be gone. Vance wiped her eye again, smearing the blood into a pink haze across her cheek. The cut was deep, throbbing in time with her heart, but the pain was distant, irrelevant data. She tracked the heat bloom of the Iron Eel's exhaust through the wreckage. She couldn't shoot through the hull of the dead boat to hit him. Physics didn't work that way. She had to wait for him to commit. "Come on," she breathed. "Make your move." She checked the chamber indicator by feel, 1 round in the pipe, 1 in the magazine. 2 shots. The HVT boat had twin 350 horsepower Mercury Verados. They were reinforced, likely with custom cowlings to deflect small arms fire. Standard ball ammunition might glance off at this angle, but Vance wasn't shooting ball. She was shooting MK-248 Mod 1 high-performance ammunition. At 800 yards, it carried enough kinetic energy to crack an engine block. The Iron Eel saw its opening. The pilot slammed the throttles forward. The bow of the armored boat leapt out of the water, the stern digging in as the props bit into the ocean. He shot out from behind the cover of the burning wreck, banking hard for the channel exit. He was fast, 45 knots and accelerating. Vance traversed the rifle, her body locked to the gun. The movement was smooth, hydraulic. She was tracking the lead, calculating the time of flight. Distance, 850 meters. Speed, 45 knots. Wind, 30 mph, full value. The math was excruciating. She had to aim almost 12 feet in front of the boat to catch the engines at the back. It was a Hail Mary shot in any other conditions. In a typhoon, it was impossible. But Vance wasn't shooting at the boat. She was shooting at a point in space where the boat would be in 1.2 seconds. 13, she whispered. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, the recoil driving the buttstock into her bruised shoulder. She didn't see the impact. She cycled the bolt immediately, clack, clack, loading the final round. Through the scope, she saw the result a split second later. The starboard engine of the Iron Eel didn't explode. It disintegrated. The round had struck the powerhead, shattering the pistons. The engine seized violently, the prop locking up at 6,000 RPM. The force of the seizure acted like a pivot point. The boat, traveling at nearly 50 miles per hour, hooked violently to the right. The sudden torque, threw the pilot against the console. But the port engine was still screaming, pushing the boat in a tight, out-of-control circle. It was still moving. It could still limp away. Vance settled the crosshairs one last time. The boat was broadside to her now, spinning in the chop. The remaining engine was exposed, glowing like a white beacon in the night vision. This was it. The last round. The magazine was empty. The chamber held the final word. The wind howled, tearing at her wet clothes, trying to shove the barrel off target. Her left arm, supporting the stock, was trembling with exhaustion. She tightened her core, turning her body into stone. She didn't think about the cold. She didn't think about Miller or the seals. She thought about the water, the black water that had tried to kill her. The black water that was waiting for these men. Exhale. Pause. 14. The trigger broke. The round crossed the 800 meters of rain-swept darkness in just over a second. It struck the port engine dead center. The fuel rail ignited. A catastrophic fireball erupted from the stern of the iron eel, lighting up the rain for hundreds of yards. The explosion blew the engine cover off and sent it spinning into the air. The boat lost all momentum. It settled heavily into the water, dead, drifting, burning. Vance held the trigger back, trapping the follow-through. She watched the thermal image. No movement, no rotation. The heat signature of the engines was fading, replaced by the chaotic heat of the fire. The convoy was destroyed. She opened the bolt, ejecting the final casing. It landed on the grating with a hollow ping. She left the bolt open. Silence returned to the lighthouse. The heavy machine guns had stopped. The engines had stopped. There was only the sound of the wind and the ocean, reclaiming the wreckage below. Vance slumped forward, resting her forehead on the cold receiver of the rifle. The adrenaline that had sustained her, that had fueled the swim and the climb and the shooting, evaporated in an instant. The cold rushed back in, a tidal wave of ice. She began to shake again, worse than before. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. The blood on her face was sticky and cooling. She looked down at the dark water. It was quiet now. A graveyard. Winchester. She croaked into the empty air, using the brevity code for out of ammo. She reached for the IR strobe on her shoulder, her fingers fumbling with the switch. She clicked it on. A tiny pulsing infrared light began to blink on the top of the lighthouse, invisible to the naked eye, but screaming into the night for anyone with eyes to see. I'm here. I'm alive. Come get me. The silence that followed the final explosion wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pregnant with the threat of retaliation. Vance lay huddled behind the concrete base of the lantern room, her knees pulled to her chest. The high-performance adrenaline that had fueled her for the last 90 minutes had drained away, leaving a void filled only by pain. Her body had gone past shivering. Her muscles were rigid, locked in a titanic state of exhaustion. Down on the water, the fire from the destroyed iron eel cast long, dancing shadows against the lighthouse. The screams of the survivors drifted up, angry, desperate shouts in Tagalog and Arabic. Then, the shooting started again. It wasn't the rhythmic, heavy thump of the DSHK this time. That gunner was dead. This was sporadic, angry fire, small arms, AK-47s popping wildly from the drifting wrecks. They knew where she was now. They knew the angel of death was perched on the tower. And even if they couldn't escape, they wanted to take her with them. Bullets pinged off the metal grating, sparking in the dark. A round slapped into the concrete inches above her head, sending a spray of dust into her hair. Vance didn't flinch. She couldn't. She simply didn't have the energy to move. The MK-13 lay next to her, the The bolt open, the chamber empty. She was Winchester. She was a weapon without teeth. "Just close your eyes," the cold whispered. "It's over." Her vision was tunneling. The periphery was black, the center a blurry gray. She watched the IR strobe blinking on her shoulder. Flash, dark, flash, dark. It was the only heartbeat she had left. She wondered if the SEALs were coming, or if the Mark V was still dead in the water, drifting toward Malaysia. If they didn't come, she would die here. Not from the bullets, but from the cold. The wind was cutting through the thin shooting smock, finding the wet skin underneath. Flash, dark, flash. Then, a new sound cut through the wind. It wasn't the throaty roar of the smuggler's outboards. It was a high-pitched whine, like a turbine spooling up. It was deep, resonant, and getting louder. Vance forced her heavy eyelids open. Out of the darkness to the south, a black shape emerged. It smashed through the waves with a violence that spoke of military-grade horsepower. The Mark V. The boat didn't slow down. It roared into the debris field, its bow wave swamping the smaller, crippled smuggling skiffs. The survivors on the wrecks turned their weapons toward the new threat, muzzle flashes sparkling. The Mark V answered. The sound was unmistakable, a terrifying electric buzz, like a chainsaw tearing through sheet metal. The twin M134 miniguns mounted on the port, and starboard rails opened up. "Bert!" A stream of red tracers, so dense it looked like a solid laser beam, swept across the water. It touched the nearest smuggling boat, and the fiberglass hull simply disintegrated. The wood, the plastic, the men, everything was erased in a cloud of splinters and pink mist. Vance watched it with detached fascination. It looked like fireworks. The Mark V pivoted, the gunners walking the fire across the remaining targets. The suppression fire from below ceased instantly. There was no fight left. There was only cleanup. The firing stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. The Mark V pulled alongside the lighthouse foundation, the engines idling with a throaty rumble. "Ghost! Sound off!" The voice was amplified by a hailer. It was Miller. He sounded frantic. Vance tried to shout. Her throat was frozen shut. She managed a weak croak. She reached up and tapped the IR strobe, making it blink faster. Below, she heard boots hitting the metal ladder. Fast, aggressive climbing. They were coming up. Vance let her head drop back onto the cold grating. She looked up at the rain. It felt warmer now. That was bad. That was the end. A shadow fell over her. "Vance!" Miller vaulted over the railing, his weapon up, scanning the platform. He saw the empty brass casings scattered on the deck. He saw the tripod. And then he saw her. He dropped his rifle and fell to his knees beside her. He grabbed her shoulders, pulling her up from the fetal position. "Talk to me, Ghost. Talk to me." His hands were warm, burning hot. She flinched. Miller saw the blood on her face, the gash on her cheek. He saw the white, waxy pallor of her skin. He saw the way her eyes were rolling back in her head. "Medic!" Miller screamed down the shaft, his voice cracking. "Get the heaters! Get the IVs! Now!" He ripped off his heavy waterproof jacket and wrapped it around her, pulling her tight against his chest armor to share body heat. "You crazy bitch," he whispered, his voice trembling. He looked out over the railing at the carnage in the channel. He saw the 14 engines floating in the water. He saw the burning remains of the convoy. He looked back at her, at the small, shivering woman who had swum through hell to stack bodies like cordwood. 14, Vance whispered. The word was a slur, barely intelligible. "What?" Miller put his ear to her lips. 14. Shots. She breathed, her eyes closing. 14. Hits. Miller stared at her. He looked at the empty magazine well of her rifle. Yeah, Miller said, his voice thick with an emotion he would never admit to. I see him, Ghost. I see him. He scooped her up in his arms, lifting her effortlessly. She weighed nothing. She was just bone and will. Let's go home, he said. Vance let the darkness take her. She didn't have to swim anymore. The world returned in a haze of white noise and antiseptic smells. Vance opened her eyes. The ceiling was white tile, punctuated by the harsh glare of fluorescent strips. The sound of the ocean was gone, replaced by the rhythmic hiss-click of an IV pump and the distant murmur of voices in the corridor. She tried to sit up, but her body refused the command. It wasn't paralysis. It was a heaviness so profound, it felt like gravity had tripled. Her muscles felt like they had been tenderized with a mallet. Easy, Sergeant. A Navy corpsman appeared in her field of vision, checking the drip line connected to her left arm. You've got a severe case of rhabdomyolysis. Your muscles broke down and flooded your kidneys with protein. We're flushing you out. If you move, you're going to wish you hadn't. Vance slumped back against the pillow. She touched her right cheek. It was covered in a thick gauze bandage, the cut from the shrapnel. 17 stitches, the corpsman noted. Gonna leave a nasty scar. Tell people you got into a bar fight in Manila. It sounds better than the truth. The truth. Vance looked at the clock on the wall. 1400 hours. She had been out for 12 hours. The door to the recovery room opened. The air pressure changed. Lieutenant Commander Miller walked in. He looked different without his armor. He was wearing clean fatigues, freshly shaved, but his eyes were red-rimmed and heavy. He held a clipboard in one hand and a styrofoam cup of coffee in the other. He pulled a metal chair up to the bedside and sat down. He didn't speak for a long time. He just looked at her, studying her face as if trying to reconcile the woman in the hospital bed with the creature on the lighthouse. How is the team? Vance asked, her voice rasping like sandpaper. Fine, Miller said. Tex is complaining about the paperwork. Red is sleeping. He took a sip of coffee. We recovered the debris. The payload is confirmed destroyed. General Kale is confirmed KIA. The chemical precursors are at the bottom of the Sibutu passage. Good. The official report, Miller tapped the clipboard, states that the convoy was destroyed by a localized weather event and subsequent mechanical failures. A tragic accident at sea. Vance nodded slowly. And the 14 holes in the engine blocks? Corrosion, Miller said, his face deadpan. Salt water is hell on machinery. He set the clipboard down on the bedside table. This was the way of their world. There would be no Silver Star, no press conference, no parade. The mission was black. It never happened. The swim never happened. You disobeyed a direct safety advisory, Miller said quietly. You left the boat without a tether. You engaged targets without a spotter. You risked compromising the entire operation. Vance met his gaze. She didn't flinch. I completed the mission, sir. Miller held her stare for a moment longer, then let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping. The mask of command cracked, just for a second. Yeah, he said softly. You did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and heavy. He placed it on the sterile white sheet next to her hand. It wasn't a medal. It was a challenge coin. It was heavy brass, battered and worn, the enamel chipped on the edges. On one side was the trident of the SEALs. On the other was the unit crest of Team 4. But But it wasn't the standard issue coin they gave to VIPs. This one had a jagged scratch across the face, a mark of personal history. "That was in my pocket in Fallujah," Miller said, standing up. "It was in my pocket in the Argon Dab. It's kept me above water for a long time." Vance touched the cold metal with her fingertips. "You swam the gap, Vance," Miller said. He walked to the door, his hand resting on the handle. He paused, not looking back. "Next time we go out, you ride in the front of the boat." The door clicked shut. Vance lay alone in the silence. She picked up the coin, feeling the weight of it. It was heavier than any ribbon they could pin on her chest. It was an admission. It was an apology. It was respect, forged in the only currency that mattered to people like them: survival. She looked out the window. Beyond the chain-link fence of the base, she could see the ocean. The storm had passed. The water was blue, calm, and indifferent. It gave no sign of the violence it had swallowed the night before. It hid its secrets well. Vance closed her fist around the coin. She felt the ache in her muscles, the throb of the scar on her face, and the cold that still lingered deep in her bones. She smiled, a small, tight movement of her lips. She was the ghost in the machine. She was the wake that vanished before it hit the shore. And she was ready for the next storm.